So welcome everyone to the third of our webinar series here this year with clubs. So for anybody who hasn't been to our past club development and excellence summits, usually these are kind of like a one-day thing in person where we go through a number of topics. One of the actual sort of benefits to what we're going through right now is the ability to tackle numerous topics, more spaced out, not having to commit, to one full day. So, we're planning to do a few more of these, at least for the months of February and March. And then we will likely, kind of do these periodically throughout the season as well. The other plan is to do a sort of quarterly fireside chat, so to speak, where basically there's no topic per se. It's just a chance for clubs to register, sign up, and chat amongst themselves, chat with myself at the OCA or any of our other staff that might be on it, and really casual. So figured this is a good use of some of the resources that we have to be able to talk to more people, because obviously there's still a lot of questions, moving forward on what the season will look like, what we're dealing with, how things may change in the future. So on that, it's probably a great segue to Chris. So I asked Chris Pollett to join us today. Chris was one of probably about 6 or 7 clubs last year who we had on a call about how can we run sort of your club time trial during the COVID situation that we're dealing with. And there was some good feedback, some good discussion, some brainstorming, and Chris's club was one of those that actually was hosting time trials before this. So I'm going to pass it along to Chris and have him sort of talk about what the past was, and how they adapted, and what he sees for the future in time trials. So take it away, Chris.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Give me 1 second here just to get this. So I will let you know, so I work, my day life is as a banker. And so this is extremely exciting to be able to actually do not like a fill form PowerPoint. So if it's a little over the top with how fun it is, this is really my creative license, because normally I have to use pretty templated ones. So thanks, Chris, for this opportunity. So when I look at what we've done kind of in the past, and Chris had talked to me about doing this opportunity, I saw this as a good way to share some of our learnings. And I think some of the learnings, not just even when I think about COVID, but I even think the year before COVID, we started to gain some traction and really create some excitement around time trials. And transparently, I think that COVID kind of helped, and is in my positive nature, I'm thinking that this will probably help revitalize time trials for the long term. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, so the London Centennial Wheelers, so we're based out of London, Ontario. We're coming up on just over 50 years old. So you'll know us mainly probably from Springbank, if you haven't been a member, but we've developed a ton of athletes through the sport, and really we've focused on racing excellence and producing people who want to be competitive. And so the City of London has multiple different cycling clubs, which for a city our size is quite surprising. But we do have 3, and kind of their focuses are all different. And so we have one that's focused kind of on a recreational, one that's solely focused on just kind of fun touring, and then we tend to be the one that takes up the like racing, or people that want to be competitive, or those people that are looking really to kind of stretch their limits and grow in the sport. And if you do have questions, raise your hand, say something, unmute. Really the presentation is a guide to help our conversation go through. So when we look back at our past, we had a couple of struggles. So I took over the racing 3 years ago and took over president 2 years ago. And when I looked at the time trials, there was actually a lot of consideration being done as to whether we should continue to offer them or not. What we saw was very low participation, and we consider the number of people we needed to have out, the volunteers, the tracking, the amount of time and effort involved. there was a lot of question as to whether we should be doing them, and we were doing them on a weekly basis. So in 2018, looking back, we typically had between 8 to 12 people participating per week. And quite often we'd end up, if weather was iffy, there was something else going on, 2 or 3 people would be showing up. And it was kind of the consistent people that were showing up. Part of that was the engagement, so there wasn't a lot of fanfare. So we have a very strong racing culture in our club. So we have a weekly series that is crits and road races on Tuesday nights, and TTs were the Thursday night. And what we saw was we really got everyone rallied around the racing, because it's the cool, exciting crits and road races. And what we saw was there wasn't a lot of focus on the time trials and kind of developing the club. But we kind of talked to members. Time trials were seen kind of as boring, and they were seen as the thing that people did because they were time trialists. Right, they didn't see the value over and above just, the time trial itself and the performance of it. We looked at results, and over the past several years, the same people were winning, right? So we looked at results, and it was the same 2 or 3 people that focused on TTs, that were showing up, that were, getting the points from it. But we also looked, and they were just, year over year, just consistently kind of taking that top step. We looked back at some of the safety concerns, and so we did have a pretty big accident back in 2016. We also had a lot of courses that I had some concerns about. And so I looked at the courses, and they weren't very friendly for people. They were great for those people that time trialed a lot. But what we saw is that they weren't really great for people who wanted to get into it. They were on some kind of busier roads and somewhat challenging. And so I had taken a step back and took a look and said, what do we need to do to engage the club members? And so one piece of that was like, how do we get more people to come out? And I think that was consistently a struggle across both races. We had dwindling numbers in the road and crits. While they were still performing pretty well, we were getting between 30 and 40 per night. Results. So what we wanted to do is take a look, if we have the same people winning, there's no excitement and no personal challenge to people. So we wanted to look at refocusing on personal improvement. I took a good look at all the courses we had offered in current and in past and evaluated the safety of them. And what we also looked at was locations. And so what we saw is we had a lot of locations that, you had to throw your bike on the car, you had to drive for, 20, 25 minutes to get to a course to go do a 15K TT, which, at the end of the day, you're getting off work at 5 o'clock. You're either bringing your bike to work or you're scrambling to run. You've got other things going on. So what we looked is, 2019, so we refocused on that participation, started to engage our members. So in 2019, we typically had between 10 and 15, which doesn't sound like a big increase. But when we look at just getting the excitement around it and making sure that we were sharing posts, making sure people knew that TTs existed. And then last year with COVID, I think saw a bump, but I also saw a lot of things outside of COVID. We were over 20 all but 1 week. And we actually hit so we had capped it for 3 groups of 10 initially because of the 10 limit. And we actually hit that limit twice. So we had 30 people showing up. We also tracked, so we changed the way we started to track the riders. So instead of focusing on overall time, what we started doing was using the personal best on the course. So we have multiple courses, and so what we did was we looked at the COM, so using Strava, the fastest time that we had ever seen recorded on that, and we set that kind of as a handicap for everyone. And then so what we shifted the focus was, instead of trying to beat the overall time and be the fastest, is trying to improve your times week over week. And so watching people improve and celebrating the improvement actually got people interested in coming back out, and because you could start to refine the skills that they were working on. So things like, if you're a new and beginner, and let's say a 15K TT, you might be 27, 28 minutes, right? That first race. And what you're going to see is week over week, by talking to people, taking that time at the beginning, I was giving pointers and tips and how, like, positioning, like, what you can do on the bike, getting comfortable on the bike, how to be consistent, how to pace the ride. What we saw is, like, week over week, people were dropping amounts of time and their excitement for continuing to come back. So instead of coming out and being that person that goes out and does 27 minutes and you're the last person out there, The next week you come out and do 26.5 minutes. You're actually super excited to come back again to see if you can improve. And so that small shift in the way we even did the Excel, and if you want, I have an Excel template which you just put in what the time is and it calculates handicaps for you. And what we would do is reset. So now your handicap is based on your personal best going forward. And we had people working on like their positioning, like pacing, and just seeing what those differences made. And what we also saw was engagement around the other club members. So they would start talking to the other people that had been racing for a while, asking for those tips. The other great part is we saw a lot more engagement with the youth. So we have Attack Racing in town, and so they started sending some people out, which really for youth performance, I think it's one of the best ways they should, and it's something they can focus on, but it's something they can see improvements week over week. What we have is with our AB, and I introduced in the road racing and crits as a C group, is you kind of end up your first year, you're just hoping to finish with the group. Whereas in the TTs, if you're focusing on weekly improvement, they would see growth. So safety. So we had people running all over the place, going to courses that were just because of the shift in the way the city had grown, some of the outlying communities, we saw massive increases in traffic and speed. So what we did is reduce the number of courses we were offering, made things simpler. It also made it easier to track the personal bests and be able to set those sort of handicaps off of, because you're only focusing on a couple. We also took a look at the different traffic designs and starts where we were doing them, shifted a couple of those things, and just made things easier. And then the other is we looked at merits. So there was a big focus in the past, and it really was everyone was showing up for TTs because they focused on TTs to do the auto cup TT, and then they that's all they did. And so by refocusing on getting people involved, first of all, if you're tracking handicaps, it doesn't matter what you race week over week. So you were excited to be there on a Merrick's, as long as you're on the same bike week to week, you could win. As well as it got people, you don't have to spend money on specialized equipment you're maybe using. We look at the O-Cups across, the past couple of years. If you bought a TT bike just to do O-Cups, you probably raced 4 or 5 races on a $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 bike. Whereas if it's your regular road bike, 1, it's going to benefit you if you race. 2, it's a personal improvement. 3, and 3, it's your bike you're riding all the time, so you're going to improve your overall performance. Any questions? I saw the flashing there. I wasn't sure if that was a question or a hand up.
So there's a question in the chat, Chris, just about for the time trials at the club. Are they all 15K each week? Is there any sort of variance?
That's a great question. So we currently have a course that's 15K, and we have a course that's 20K. And then last year, I'll be honest, I found a course that was incredible, and I'm hoping that's where we host our Oak Cup this year race. And it's actually like 47K, and people hate me for it. But it's like a super smooth road with a nice shoulder, and it's like has a huge shoulder. You're on the lake the whole time. It's super quiet. Like it's this perfect place. So I went out and smashed a TT on it one day on my road bike and was like, this has to be a course. And so I suckered a bunch of our club to come out. We actually ended up having people join our club so they could come and participate in what I thought was a crazy idea. We offered it was a 47.8 kilometer. And then the other option that day we offered was a 25 kilometer, just to make sure that people were there comfortable. And then the irony is only one person registered for the 25K. Everyone wanted to do the full thing. So don't be afraid to put challenges out there. I'll be honest, I've been tempted to throw in a double lapper TT of it and make it like a 95K TT and see if I could get someone who's crazy enough to do it with me. So good question though. And actually later on, I will also have, I'll show you some of the course information for our courses too, to show you some of the good, bad, and the ugly. I think I see Brody.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, you mentioned a bunch of things that you changed like year over year. Was there like any one that you saw like a significant like draw for people that was like the first one that you noticed? Okay, that was definitely a change that, you know, if you were to recommend focus on this first, maybe might be like a place to start.
So a lot of the changes went at the same time because I kind of took the winter and looked at things and then was like really, because we as a club I was like, because I was running the racing, and from my perspective, I was like, I don't want to put all these calories in for like a couple of people a week. And at that point, I was going to the TTs really because I would go and get the results, and it was just easier for me. But I'm like, I'm not even excited to be here. And so I think that there's two things. I think is one was going in and stop tracking by results and track by improvements. I think I really got a lot of buy-in for people being excited, and it allowed me to actually get people excited through social media. So we have our Facebook group and saying, hey, congrats, Joe, you won this week. And like, you were the slowest person, right? Like you finished in 27.5 minutes, but you improved your time by a minute. Like, and what did you do? And then you get that kind of momentum. And the second, I think is, and it's funny because it's not on here, but it's really just focusing on the TTs are simple to people who do them, but to people who don't, it's still intimidating, right? People show up to a road or a crit and they're like, they've probably done a learn to ride and a learn to race. They've probably done some group rides so they feel comfortable. They've asked people tips. They've went and rode in groups. They show up to a TT and they're like, everyone's like, well, you should be able to know TT, just ride out there, you turn around, you come back. It seems pretty easy. But I think I tried to make it comfortable and working on like where the turnaround point is and making it clear, explaining how to turn around, explaining how to go faster, taking that time and giving tips and making that kind of culture where if I'm giving tips, they're probably going to ask someone else. And I think it's that creating a supportive environment that's not based around winning, it's based around improving. And I think that the tips and the support and the showing just makes people more comfortable and confident. So does that answer the question? Cool beans.
So there's another question in the chat, Chris. If you could quickly summarize how you determined the handicap or how you guys determined the handicap.
Yep. So what I did was this, similarly. So I used the King of the Mountain. I used the Strava time just because it was easiest. Our club is slightly still archaic, and we had a lot of paper records, and I wasn't going to go back to past records on the courses. So what I did was I took the time, and I basically, everyone's time is weighted against that, and that's your handicap. So you do have to race your first race to get your handicap. I did ask everyone if they could provide a time, or if they were on Strava, tell me what their best time was, and I put that in to determine a handicap. But you know, the first week out, people would end up setting their handicap. And then the second week out is basically that time minus the COM gives you your amount of your handicap. So then minus your time equals. So your second week, you're pretty much going to be spot on the COM because you're handicapped. But someone will have improved that week probably. So you're probably not going to win your second week, but then you start to get that benchmark and you can still celebrate the win because that first week they probably didn't do very well. You get someone coming out. And I would gamble they won't pace well, they don't have good position. The second week, they know a bit more. The third week, that's when they'll start to see those improvements. But it still gives you kind of those opportunities week over week to celebrate them. And it's just an Excel, if you want it, I have an ugly one, but you can just drop the numbers in. It's pretty easy to use. Is that it? Cool. All right. So we all know COVID happened. That was last year, right? It feels like March 295th or something. It's like Groundhog Day. So COVID added a whole different layer. So it kind of sucks because I was really excited about revitalizing racing and revitalizing TTs. And there was a ton of stuff I wanted to do last year, but it made me double down and refocus on TTs. And so a couple of things that we did to make it successful that I think would have to be implemented at least in the beginning of this year, if not for the whole year, just because COVID's a reality we're going to live with this year. The first was timing. And so in the past, we had someone hold your butt of the seat and push you from the start and with a stopwatch and basically had your time go off and, standing there and timing. And so in the initial iteration of when we were able to, and the OCA gave us permission to run it, we ran the pilot for the first couple of weeks and we had groups of 10. And so we wanted as many participants as possible. So if I had a timer in each of those groups of 10, now I could only have 27 participants. And so my goal if you can't tell already, is to get people riding bikes, is to get people excited and more people out. And I was like, we need to figure out a way to make this easier for them to not waste 3 spots by someone standing at the side of the road doing timing. And so we moved our timing to Strava. And I'll be honest, there was a couple of people who were stalwarts and didn't want to move it. And they were, well, I'm used to having someone time it. But by about the 3rd or 4th race, everyone's like, this is actually way easier. And I think transparently, I'm probably going to use this going forward because it makes just record keeping easier. We didn't have to have someone standing there. Volunteering for the TTs, people were always nervous about if I get the time wrong. And so it made it easier for me to get volunteers. I got a kid who wanted to do it for his, like, part of his volunteer hours, right? In the past, he probably wouldn't have wanted to sit there and worry about writing down the time exactly. So it makes things easier. Distancing. So enforcing the physical distance was easy on the bike, right? So we were staggered by a minute. So we changed the way we ran. So we ran fastest person first instead of slowest person, which if I look back, is probably what we're going to do in the future too, because it's very demoralizing to be the slowest person and passed by everyone. And so I think that actually is a takeaway as well, is the reverse start isn't a bad thing if you're trying to develop people, because they'll still have someone in front of them to chase. And that front person who's probably your fastest doesn't care about chasing because they're a TT specialist anyway. So who cares? The other thing was I had a 0 tolerance. And so whether it was in the parking lot or hanging out before, because, you know, you've got 10 people kicking around who all know each other. There was like a very much, you knew Chris was going to say something and our volunteers knew to say something if you were breaking that physical distancing guideline. And so I think having that 0 tolerance and saying, like, seriously, you will not come back next week if you can't follow the rules. I have 0 problem doing so. It was kind of helped because the first couple of weeks we were we were full the whole time. So especially when we were at 10 people, I told people there's 0 tolerance. The next was parking. So I don't know what the restrictions are going to look like in the spring when we start getting going, but I'm assuming for the worst. So what we did last year is, because we had 10 per group, we designated different areas for the group. So we had a group start and then clear. And then the next group, though, because we know they're going to get there early, they're going to go warm up, is we had them park at a different location. You know, it's half a block away. One is at an LCBO parking lot, which is convenient if it's still open and you get there. The other is at a convenience store, a community center. And then the third one went back to the LCBO. So it made sure that we didn't have overlap in the parking lots for people, which just from the way it looked, especially when we started up, was still in the tight COVID restrictions. It made sure that we didn't look like we had a huge gathering. Even though we had the time gaps between, we just knew with warming up, it just worked better, and logistically it worked. You know, it took making sure people read the emails and actually doing that. And the last was sign-in. And so in the past with RTTs, you showed up, the volunteer took your name, kind of had an idea of the order, would shuffle it around, and then tell everyone when their start time was. And then would line people up and go. But with COVID, 1, we had to restrict. 2, we wanted to track who was showing up at the events in case we needed to do contract tracing, right? So if they're in the 10, I want to be able to let them know. So we went to an online registration, which really was just a Google sheet that they put their name on. But the great part is it actually allowed me to put their time from the previous week or their anticipated speed and then filter them and tell them their time the day before. So they would get an email. Typically it was like the morning of, and it showed them the start list. And it worked really well. It was the same sort of thing. They were used to just showing up, and the first week or 2 was painful. But back to the 0 tolerance was, I only allowed people 1 time of missing registering. And I actually tracked it on the results sheet. Have you used up your 1 time? And I didn't have anyone else. And I probably near the end of the season had lost 1 or 2 people who, you know, forgot and then just didn't show up for a ride. But at the end of the day, by enforcing that, people registered by, you know, 4 or 5 o'clock the evening before. The registration was pretty much done, which made it easier logistically for our team, which the team being me doing the organizing. But questions? I thought I saw a hand button pop up there, but I could be wrong. Okay. Chris is on mute if you needed anything, but so very positive. Go ahead.
It does look like Brody has his hand up and Michael Longfield. So I'll start with Brody and then we'll move to Michael after.
Cool. Just wanted to ask, like, that all sounds great how you're handling COVID, makes a ton of sense. But the Strava part's interesting. I want to know, like, we're using like the Strava race feature, because I did a couple mountain bike events last year where they had Strava segments and it was all done through that. Is that the feature you're using to do that?
No, we were just using segments. So okay. Our races, like, I actually had to create a new one for one of them. But the other one, our race courses had been around for a while, so somebody had made Strava segments. The one thing I did, because in the past we had done the seat hold, right? So you had a standing start. And also because we know the GPS is still
That's what I was going to ask about.
So what I did was I moved the start actually about probably 10 meters back and painted the line on the road. So I went and got this spray can. And that, I think, evened out the standing start, but also eliminated those GPS errors. And then I did look at a couple people throughout the year. They were like my time, like I looked and they were an outlier. They seemed like they were super slow week over week. And so when I looked, there was a dead pause at the beginning of the segment because it picked them up that thought it started there. So I would just remove that time using Strava. But it worked really well. And I think it was moving it back, setting the segment, and using the same spot week over week by painting it instead of just guessing. I went out there one day with my phone and like stood there and made sure the GPS was good and marked the spot and then moved it down a bunch just to make sure we didn't capture them early.
Cool.
Yeah. And then the good part is I have Strava Premium. So I do think whoever is doing the timing, if you can do it that way, would probably be beneficial because it lets you filter by day all the results from that same. So it made the results really easy. I just filtered by day. And then like I just typed them in. It was way easier than the paper, which I could never read by the time I got it home.
Yeah, I did an event last year and they had every week they had a new route on mountain bike and they built it. And they had, you had to know where the start and finish were, like you said, and kind of make sure you were already GPS was started. But it was neat because every week it actually crowned gold, silver, bronze for you.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I haven't done that.
It was neat.
I've seen it from some fondos and stuff. So I knew it existed, but I'm a simple kind of guy. So I just used what was existing.
Cool, but it works. So that's good to know. Okay.
Like Michael Longfield.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I've got about 10,000 questions, but the one I was going to ask was just to confirm, in terms of sign-in, this was just for, like, you had to be a club member, right?
Yeah.
So you couldn't do this? Okay.
That's it?
So then you were able to control everything by virtue of, you know they have a license, they have this, that, and the other, they've agreed to various other terms and conditions as part of their membership and not have to handle it as part of registration?
Oh yeah, so it's only open to club members, and I reinforced that a little later in the presentation. But yeah, it's only club members. And I was so because of last year we were getting the manual COVID waivers. I was tracking people down when they registered to get them in, and then I added them to the list. And then if there was a new name on that sheet that I didn't know, like I get the emails for the registrants, I would just double check. But I think I had one person actually the very first race that put their name on there and hadn't registered for the club yet. And so it was just a quick, by the way, you need to go register before you can race and send me your COVID waiver, which was painful to get. But yeah, we just make it clear, and that's pretty straightforward.
Great, thanks.
So that looks like that's the question. Just to remind anyone who may not have seen any of the emails or been on any of the past webinars. So when Chris is referring to COVID waiver last year, because all this kind of happened mid-membership season, I would say, we kind of had to find an interim route for the liability potentially of COVID. This year, all that's been built into the member waiver. So whenever somebody gets their OCA membership, they're basically agreeing that they understand the risks that can come with the current situation. So there's no need to send them to a separate place to fill out a COVID waiver. You can, sort of rest assured that everything's being captured in that one sort of OCA membership process. So,
which I'm very thankful for, because that was painful to get people to do it and send it to me. So some positives though. So I'm a pretty positive guy, so I like to take, the lemonade with the lemons. And so the Strava, people actually liked it in the end. So I think we had a couple of people that didn't have GPSs, and I just had them manually tell me their time. There's a couple of youths. There was one youth and one older gentleman who just does not want a GPS. And I was like, you know what, that's fair. Just tell me your time. Like, we're not handing out, like, it's your personal improvement, right? Like, we're not handing out awards. We're not handing out money. If you lie to me about the time, you're just hurting yourself, because now you've got a harder time to beat for next week. So good luck. So at the end of the day, it was a trust thing. And I think it worked. And I saw most of the people actually enjoying it. It just made things easier for us too. So super cool about COVID-19. And I know people don't expect to hear this, but we saw a ton of new people come out and do the TTs that had never done a TT, had never been comfortable. And I think some of it's the things we were doing, but I think some was just COVID, like, let's be honest. But I think the cool part is they all got hooked because of what we were doing. Because of the excitement we created around it, the environment we created around it, around personal improvement, the tips, the social aspect. I truly feel that a bunch of these people, the weird part is we actually ended up with, I think, 13 new members this year that had never joined the club before, because of the, hey, why don't you come out and try these TTs with me, right? And I didn't expect that. Like, I truthfully thought it was going to be we'd end up with our, 40, 50% of the members would join this year, and those same people would come out. But we ended up with a ton of people that got hooked. And so I think we had 56 unique individuals show up to our TTs this year. Considering we normally are a club of 120 to 125, that's actually pretty darn good, if you ask me. And all the hardcore racers, except for maybe me and one other guy, didn't participate at all. So it was not the normal people you would have thought. It was people that showed up and just had fun. Volunteers. So I think because we kept it easy, we had some new people willing to put their hands up and do it. Because I think taking away I'll be honest, I'm standing at the side of the road and people are super nervous about, if I get their time wrong, they're gonna be mad at me. Like, the Strava timing, I think, made it easier. We made it easy on people. Like, I brought the kit to the start of the race every week, and here's what you do. There was lots of explanation, made them comfortable. I did capture it, and the chase. So I truly think I'm gonna actually change the whole way we do things, and I think we're gonna do fastest first. Because the first couple of people don't care about chasing people. They're motivated by just destroying themselves. But it was really demoralizing. Like, when you have a person doing a 27-minute 15K, and you have your leader doing a 19-minute 15K, that person is passing everyone. And those last, you get passed 8, 9, 10 times, that's pretty demoralizing. And really, it's an easy switch. You're not hindering the people that are out front. If anything, you're making them chase someone faster, and they're probably going to do better, or keep away from someone they know that's close, versus the other, which is demoralizing the people at the front. Questions? So looking at the future. So I think a big piece for us is I'm going to double down on youth. And I'll be honest, double down on women, because I think really they are the key to our sport growing. I look around, and we honestly, tapping into the attack racing, which is in town, was critical to us growing the past couple of years. But I look, and really that's what we should be doing. There's a ton of potential to get them. And when I think of TTs, it's the easiest way to get someone out riding. And I think, we struggle with getting women engaged and youth engaged in the sport. And I think if we make, this is that interim step to get someone comfortable to showing up to racing, I think you can hook some. And I think we'll end up with, them hooking more people. If you can get, a female interested and confident and showing up to the races, they will bring a friend. And I promise they ride with other women. So you're only going to help your club. The formats. So I have a couple of ideas which I had wanted to do last year, which was a team time trial. Our club had done it in the past. A couples TT. So, it's, you have to pair up with 2 people. and do a TT, which I had thought about junior and senior pairing would be kind of fun, because we're actually, when I look at a lot of our events, we're about 30% juniors, so we could be able to do it and some gravel stuff. So just playing with the formats, right? So it doesn't have to be a super aero bike with an aero helmet and super serious and going out and smashing a TT. Really, at the end of the day, we're trying to keep people engaged to better themselves on the bicycle. Beginners, so don't forget the basics. I think we spend a ton of time making sure that people are safe and comfortable and confident in racing crits, in racing road races, and showing up and doing group rides. And I think we assume TTs, someone who's new to riding should just be able to figure out. And so, you know, even I found at the start line, you know, any questions? Well, yeah, where do I turn around? Well, how long do I go? How long should this take me? If you can get ahead of those questions, you can make people a lot more comfortable and then more willing to ask the next question. How do I go faster? You know, does this super baggy jersey help me? Probably not. Things like that, like start ditching your water bottle at the start. I saw a couple of them start doing that later in the season. So you know that they're listening. The last one is social. And I think it's just, you know, I've done a lot of things in the past in the community, and I think sometimes you just have to ask, is get people to bring people out and try being, you know, try this out. And so I'll be honest, I'm giving a little bit of hint to Chris, but at some point I wouldn't mind being able to do a try a TT for external members and figure out what that looks like. Because I think we're doing a try a ride, which is a group ride, which presents a million times more risk to me. But for me, as someone who runs a club and wanted to get people in, I know it's hard, right? Like for OCA, you're into a club membership and OCA membership, so you're into $85 to show up to maybe not like something. If I can early in the season get you hooked or get you to try one and be like, hey, come on back out, I really think that would reap rewards for the clubs, but also the OCA, because I think if you get 10 or 15 new people doing TTs, you're going to get 3 or 4 of them to try road racing, and then 1 or 2 of them to do O-Cups. And if every club did that, there's 40 or 50 new people showing up to road races. So I wanted to go through a couple of kind of the good, bad, and the ugly from our past and some of the whys. So Belmont is our kind of staple for our race course. It's straight, it's flat, it's got a couple little dips. I did put the elevation profiles in there, but they're a little kind of wonky because the scales are a bit off. And I'll get Chris to send this to you after too. So it starts in the LCV entrance. It's a turn at a stop sign, which is actually a busy road it goes to. And so we've actually specifically, every person their first time they race it, I take a minute or two and explain where they need to turn. So you need to go right to the stop sign. It has an orange dot there, and you need to turn around, and it's to make sure they have a clear field of vision. There's rarely cars turning onto it, but it's the making sure it's safe and comfortable. The road itself has very low traffic. It's super smooth, and it's very close to members. So it's about 10K outside the city. So it's perfect for a warm up, which was kind of the feedback is about 50 to 60% of the participants just ride out and ride home. So it makes it easy, right? They get their whole day of riding instead of just the 15K. Our second one is Poplar Hill. It's at the north end. So Belmont is in the south end. I took a look at the postal codes for all of our members and actually kind of played around and plotted where they end up lying and where our people are. And we are biased to the south a little bit because we have a lot of St. Thomas members. And so Belmont typically sees our most for turnout. And it makes sense because it's near most of our members. So geographic distance to your start line probably does matter. Poplar Hill, so it's 20 kilometers. Interestingly, we actually stopped using it for several years because the road became awful. And then Amy and I rode on it, I think a year and a half ago, and they had repaved the whole part that was terrible. And it was always a good course. So we reintroduced it to the races this year. It's a great one. It's kind of really mean though, because you got a hill on the way back and you have a fast go out. And it tends to be a windy one because it runs north-south. So you've normally got a decent crosswind. Same sort of thing, turn at a stop sign, low traffic, smooth road. It's a moderate distance. It's about 14K. So we noticed a little less people riding out. but we still had quite a few people riding them. The next one is Saintbury. And so it's a 20K course. The start is at a random spot, so it made it a little more difficult to navigate. The turn is at a stop sign, so similar to most of our courses. What we saw though is the volume of traffic had started increasing the past couple of years. Right near the start finish, you can't see it on the map here, and I'm pointing and you guys can't see me. Right about here, there's actually a subdivision that's not even on the maps. And so a new subdivision went in, that little town was growing, and we saw traffic volumes increasing, the speeds were increasing, it doesn't have a great shoulder. And so we actually, and it's pretty far for members, it's actually closer to 25K. And so pretty much everyone was driving out there. And so we just kind of said, you know what, like the numbers aren't there, people aren't enjoying it, they're having to drive out, which I don't love driving. So we kind of started crossing it off. And then the ugly. So we have Carriage Road, which starts at a random spot. The turn is at a random spot, so you're kind of just turning in the middle of nowhere. The road is now increased in volume significantly, and the speed, it's an 80 kilometer an hour, and it's 80 the whole way. You're starting, and there's no real clear spot to start. There's no reason you should be starting there. Good news is it's smooth. They resurfaced it with chip seal, so it's actually not too bad. And it's somewhat close, but we actually pulled this out of the rotation completely. What we just saw was the risk level for people who are wanting to get into this, it was just too high. And so I think by, you know, if you're already running TTs, I think there's an opportunity to say what courses are seeing the best use and what courses should you be using. And so now in 2020, we only used Belmont and Poplar Hill. And then I'll send you guys, I'll add the other one, the silly long one. We would use it as a weekend one because it was like it was a drive. It's a 25, 30-minute drive from the edge of town. So it's a bit further away, but it's worth it because we made it a day event. So we made it a Saturday morning event where traffic was low. You know, people will get up and go, and then it's near Port Burwell. So the idea was, you know, go spend the day at the beach, you know, make a day of it. And people brought their family and kids. Chris Fippy from Kitchener-Waterloo and his wife are both time trialists. They joined the club, brought their kids, and spent the day at the beach. And so we made it a kind of fun event for the club while still being COVID friendly. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, the time trial was a lot of fun and a big challenge. Any questions about courses? So, I mean, it sounds like most of you are already running TTs or probably have, but I think there's some value in, like, I was hoping a couple more clubs would join to get some, but I think there's starting from the basics. So you need some people who are going to be passionate about running them. I love growing it, and truthfully, I love focusing on it. And so you kind of need an hour or two a week to commit to it. So be clear with them and be honest, like what it's going to take to run these. Make sure you have volunteers lined up. So, you know, have a pool of 3 or 4 people who you know are comfortable doing the TTs and running them, being a volunteer, because there is a bit of a skill to it. Once we get away from COVID, probably even more so, because you'll, you know, want to go back to the standing starts, and just gauge the interest. So if there's not interest, you know, you don't need to run them, but at the end of the day, you don't also need a ton of people to be worth it. I mean, we were still running them with 8 or 10, but if you can get 15 or 20 people, that's actually plenty. Scout locations, so you kind of want more than 5 kilometers. I would say 7.5 is ideal, with no lights, smooth roads, lower volume traffic. Try and find roads that are close to your members. I think that actually is quite key, because people are more apt to, you know, instead of just go and do a 15K, they're more apt to ride out, do a 15K, ride back. It turned into a social, go there and ride home with a couple of people. With COVID, we noticed, like, you know, people were riding in 1s and 2s of people they knew and they were riding with anyway. And so it still kept it somewhat social, even with COVID. Check when works for it. The day of the week, so we do Tuesdays is our crits and road races, and then Thursdays is our TTs. And I mean, I race at an elite level, and we have quite a few members that, you know, actually stick to a training plan. And what we found is the Tuesday road race TT worked out very well to have a Thursday time trial. You know, you have your Wednesday as your kind of recovery day, still have enough time to recover up if you're racing on the weekend. And then also look at your time you start the event. So what I did was I actually offset from sunset. And so my times actually shifted a bit throughout the year to try and allow people to get home, feed the kids, get home, not rush, and as possible, ride out to the venue and things like that. The idea was to make it as you could get as much out of the ride as you could without impacting your personal life. And so what we found was by shifting it later as the sun sets later, it allowed people to, you know, get home, have a quick bite to eat, maybe ride out instead and not feel rushed. So why is, you know, it's going to add value. I think it's a great way to get people into the sport, whether newer or youths. It's going to bridge that gap to get them comfortable racing. It helps, you know, the other thing I want to tap into is the multi-sport athletes. We have tons of them in London, and there's clubs themselves. And I think my plan this year was to start tapping that market. We have lots. I see them all over on the roads. It's like, hey, come join the club. You can come do a TT once a week. Right? You want to run one, you can run them 2 days a week. I don't really care. Do a run afterwards. I don't love running, but I'll torture yourself if you want. But hook those people in. With this year with COVID, I didn't feel comfortable in growing it that much and ask those things. I think Michael Longfield got kicked out there. I didn't kick him out though. Deciding how you're going to start the athletes. Truthfully, I think that the standalone, the Strava works. I think, you know, if people are going to be serious into TT, I think there's an opportunity for me to, like those people practice that. But I think for the normal person, truthfully, I don't want a random person holding the butt of my seat anyway. You know, 90% of my racing, I don't really do TTs. So I'm fine with a standing start. You know, those people that do want to, then they can figure it out. Like I would hold like Conrad on our club. Like I know he does real TTs and he's serious about it. Dude, I'll hold your seat for you. We don't need to volunteer to do that for the 1 or 2 people. And then how and where to communicate results. So we have an Excel sheet, and so we kind of keep that on there. Actually, if you take a look at lcw.ca, I've been playing around with how to present it on our results page under racing, but just find a way to get those results out there. So my kind of commitment is because I would ride out and ride back to, I think, all of them this year. And I said I would get results by the kind of mid the next day. So normally I got up in the morning, had my coffee and put the results in, but by using Strava, it actually made it a quick, pretty easy one. In the past, I would end up with someone who I couldn't read their handwriting, or, you know, it was smudged, and I was spending way too much time figuring it out. I found Strava just, you know, it literally was 15 minutes the next morning to get the results up, and then I would post it to social media. So did you have a question, Mr. Michael?
Yeah, I was actually wondering when you were talking about days of the week during the pandemic, when did you end up holding your time trials, given you couldn't do your Tuesday race series?
We left it Thursday. I'm an optimist, so I was being hopeful that racing would start back up, kind of. I'll be honest. You know, the reality of once we kind of hit mid-June, I knew it wasn't going to. The other part was, and it's, we pushed it later too. So we actually did TTs all the way through September. Normally we stop at the end of August. And I think we'll continue doing that. It's the same. I actually, when I submitted my form to Chris for this year, I left it on Thursdays for TTs, but I pushed them all the way to September and the racing in hopes that hopefully racing starts. But I think also, like, the sunlight's there and people want to race, then let them race.
Yeah. Cool, thanks.
Yep. All right. So next steps. So I think decide to host TTs. Don't be afraid to directly ask. I think really you got to send emails to your people and say, you know, come on out, and then poke people to say, hey, get people to join. I think we're all afraid to ask. It's the same as volunteers. So I can say on I need a volunteer for a Tuesday night. I can put a post on social media on Sunday and say, I need someone to volunteer on Tuesday, and nobody will volunteer. But if I message any one of a dozen people, they'll probably do it. So sometimes the direct ask is actually better. So if you want to grow your TTs, you probably need to do the same thing. And it's way easier to get someone to do a TT than to volunteer usually. Create some excitement around it. So I think, create those social posts, focus on the positivity, focus on the personal improvement. I think you're going to hook some people. And just a reminder, it is a benefit for your club members. So they got to join the club to do it. Review the COVID protocols. I think what I've gone through gives you a good understanding of how to make it work. But back to that COVID basics is, I think you have to have zero tolerance. And like, I show up to a ride, I know 95% of the people that are there, if not everyone. One, I'm the club president, and two, I probably ride with them personally. But they have to know that you're going to treat everyone equally and that you have zero tolerance. And I think that goes for safety in general. Like if someone was chopping wheels at a Tuesday night crit, I would have the exact same conversation as I would have of COVID. This is your warning, and then next time you're not here. And I think by putting the hammer down a bit and people knowing I'm a bit of a hard ass probably helps. And then I did post the clubs that are currently hosting TTs. So, if you have a club that's nearby, maybe, join their club and go show up. Or have a conversation with who runs their TTs, ask them how much effort it is. For me, I think it's probably 2 to 3 hours a week if I ignore the fact that I go to all of them. If you want to participate, of course, that's a little more time. But I think it takes you a bit of time to get that, submit it to the OCA at the beginning of the season. It's a little admin heavy in the front end, but, at a weekly basis, you're probably an hour or two. By the time you find a volunteer, you've decided. But I think it goes back to the keep it simple too. By switching just to have the 2 courses, we simplified things a lot. The communication was easier, the course design was easier, people were more apt to. So that's my presentation, and this is straight out of the 80s. So what questions are left? Such a good presentation, I left you all speechless, or you can't figure out how to use the unmute button. It's one or the other.
So Chris, just obviously the LCW and I think a lot of the clubs here are on the road side. But I think this sort of format, probably would have be simple to apply if you were a mountain bike club.
Oh, yeah.
I think the basics are pretty much the same, correct? So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I had someone ask if we would want to do a similar kind of thing with mountain biking. The challenge in London is really only have 2 spots to mountain bike, and one is super busy, and the other has a weekly race series. So, and truthfully, I'm stretched thin. There's only so many days I can do things. I think it could be used for cross too. I'm hoping that cross season is whole, but I'll tell you right now, if cross season isn't looking whole, I'll be doing a weekly cross series that's based around this sort of starting way as well. So I think, it can be, you can work around it. Cool.
You were so thorough, there's no questions.
Yeah, normally at work I'd be like, well, I'm going to give you all time back, but I mean, at the end of you guys are all just done anyway. So
yeah, Daryl, hey, you're listening to Chris. There's a lot of things there that we do in Thunder Bay, very similar, except we run a lot more courses, which maybe we could rethink.
Yeah, we had. So when I took the club over, we had 11 race courses, and then we had, I think, 13 TT courses in our list.
Yeah.
And I think when you're getting people, I think the refocusing on personal improvement, it's hard to see if you personally improved if you're at a different course every week.
Yeah.
So what I was doing was 2 weeks in 2019. I did 2 weeks at one course, 2 weeks at the other course, and then just back and forth. In 2020 with COVID, just to simplify, because the first month I wanted to get the whole process and the parking and everything down, so I kind of kept it simple, and I used Belmont for a month, and then Poplar Hill, and then back to Belmont, and then back to Poplar Hill. So I really think it made it easier for people. They kind of knew where they were going. They weren't chasing things around. They knew the course, especially when you got someone new, right? That second week, they're going to feel way more comfortable. In what variation do you really get in a TT? If you're not cross-eyed, you're not looking at the scenery anyway.
Can I ask, like we do have fairly rural areas, so all the courses are pretty safe. It's sort of in that first category of when you had your races up. Do you get pressure of always going back to the same course? I don't know, there might be a local house or somebody says, why are these cyclists on this road?
Yeah, So it's interesting.
That's one of the reasons why we do move around is we move the pressure around the town.
Yeah, Belmont's not really a problem because there's no real houses there. But one of the pieces had been in the past was Poplar Hill. They had complaints by the people, and so I think there's one we still were. We're there for a month, but then gone. We kind of disappear and come back a month later. The two is I'm strict about enforcing just respect for where you are. So it's what you're doing in that area. And like I waved to the kids. There were some kids watching us one day, right? Like, I think it's the manner in which you are. Like, I kind of snapped on someone because I knew they went and peed down the road. I'm like, go down the country road if you need to. Like, I get it, but doing it here where the houses are, I'm like, that's how we lose access to the stuff, littering and being loud and obnoxious, blocking the road. And so I think, yeah, I think it's what you do in the area. Of course, you're going to end up with, someone who complains. But I think you can mitigate a lot of that by just having that culture at the beginning. And back to the zero tolerance, like I have no problem taking someone aside and say, if I catch you taking a leak here again, like you're done. Like I'll refund your money, you're done.
Yeah. Thanks for the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Back over to you.
So thank you, Chris, again. So if nobody has any other questions, we will certainly make this available, and I'm sure Chris has already flipped me his slideshow, so we can definitely make that available. And if there's anything else, I'm sure I'll have a discussion with Chris on if there's anything else he can provide. But yeah, we should have this sent out hopefully early next week. But again, if you ever have questions, feel free to shoot us an email here at the office. If I don't have the email or if I don't have the answer, I usually will reach out to some people that I trust to sort of give me some feedback that I can provide. So and like Chris said, it's probably it's a weird thing to say, but now seems to be a perfect time to sort of, if you haven't ever done a time trial, to sort of look into that. Not just from it's a relatively COVID friendly activity to put on, or COVID safe event to put on, but also, with the renewed interest in cycling, it's a great way for those people to use their bikes, without necessarily having the intimidation factor of coming out to either a group ride or a larger event, and relatively basic bike skills are just necessary to do your time trial. So if there's anything else, again, feel free to give us a shout here at the office. But otherwise, I will let you all get on with your evenings, and thank you again for coming out tonight. Next webinar we do have, again, I believe it's March 9th. Again, it's just a sort of social sit down. I believe that's a Tuesday night, so I apologize to anybody who has a Zwift ride. I promise I'm trying to move it around the week, but certainly there'll be others as well. And if you ever have an idea that you would like us to present or look into for a webinar, don't hesitate to shoot me an email or give me a call. Like I said, it's with the ability to put on these Zoom meetings, these Zoom webinars, I'm hoping we can sort of spread the knowledge out around the province a little easier. So yeah.
Sweet.
So thank you, everybody, and you have a great evening.